Greetings, Dr. Mark Winton here from the University of Central Florida Department of Criminal Justice, and what I'd like to do in this video is make a relatively brief, incomplete overview of some theories that may or may not be useful in your terrorism studies. We'll see that there are some general theories of crime that may be applied. And then we'll also see, especially later on in the semester, that there's specific theories or modifications that address terrorism. So I put up a PowerPoint that just gives a brief overview, and of course I'm going to leave out a lot of theories. We could have an entire course on theories of terrorism, but that's not in the course description. We'd talk about theories, but a whole bunch of other stuff too, and not only theories. Most of the time you'll find in programs that there is somewhere a course devoted to theories in that particular area. For example, we have the graduate course, The Nature of Crime, which is basically criminal justice and related theories. So, we'll examine a few, and one of the things that I've done, or we've done, I should say, with my co-authors when we write about theories is we try to kind of organize them, and I think what we went in that micro, meso, macro aspect, kind of looking at more individualistic theories, and then looking at more group social interaction type theories, and then looking at more structural or social cultural related theories. So when we went ahead and we discussed theories in our book many years ago on child abuse and neglect that I co-authored with a clinical psychologist, and then later on we published a book on sexual abuse by clergy and teachers, we kind of divided up our theoretical discussion into three major areas: psychiatric, medical, and psychopathology models first, secondly, social psychological models, and third, sociocultural models. And to just give you a brief overview of the way we organize this under the psychiatric, medical, psychopathology models, what we had basically were the medical or biological, the sociobiological or evolutionary theory, and the psychodynamic psychoanalytic perspective. Now, people will argue that we messed it up and they belong elsewhere, and that's okay because there's not 100% agreement on how these theories should be classified. The social psychological, we had the social learning model, the intergenerational transmission perspective, the exchange theory, symbolic interactionism, and structural family systems theory. And then for the sociocultural models, we had the ecological, the feminist conflict theory, the structural functional anomie strain theory, and the cultural spillover theory. So I want to mention a few of these and just discuss them briefly. One of the first areas I'll mention, when I started studying genocide, the first theory really I applied was Olson's circumplex model. This theory was developed for family therapy, and there's a whole program based on using Olson and Olson's colleagues' circumplex model for example, premarital counseling, for family therapy, and it's probably somewhat of a strange thing. Let me put it this way. When I tell family therapists that I'm using their model to study genocide, I may get eye rolls or, what in the world? And, do I see a terrorist or organization or a genocidal society? Do I view that as a family? A problematic family, a violent family? And so there are some overlaps there with the concepts that I've used. And from the circumplex model, and really the first article I published, I brought in the circumplex model, and I used it for a number of years, and then I stopped using that and replaced it with Lonnie Athens' violencization theory. But I still think the circumplex model has some very useful concepts. to analyze a group and whether and to analyze the levels of cohesion, flexibility, and also looking at the communication patterns. For example, we may look at a terrorist group and look at their levels of cohesion, their emotional bonding, or their closeness and how loyal they are to each other. And we can classify this as balanced or very high or very low. And so we might wonder that to have successful terrorist organizations operating in a way to carry out terrorist attacks, what type of cohesion would be most likely to lead to that criminal type behavior? Would it be a very high level? And also we look at flexibility, another concept there that looks at the ability of the system to change in regards to stress or leadership or control. And then again, we can classify that as balanced or very high or very low, and we can look at the communication patterns. And so I think looking at levels of cohesion and also flexibility of a group is helpful in beginning to look at risk related aspects of terrorism. And just to mention that when there's problematic behaviors, we would have, for example, distant, chaotic, enmeshed, or rigid patterns. And then you may see how that would relate, where if you have enmeshment, what does that mean? Or if you have a rigid thought pattern, leadership style, what does that mean? And you can use this for organizational analysis as well. So I just wanted to mention that that was really my first adventure into theoretical perspectives and terrorism studies. And I think maybe, 20 years ago or so, I presented at a terrorism conference, and I used a circumplex model at the time. It seemed to generate some discussion and interest, certainly. The medical model, again, it's still a very popular, useful model in family therapy that has been empirically tested and supported. So, and many people, if they get married, they may actually, and if they go through premarital counseling, they may actually get the circumplex model evaluation to see where they stand, kind of used to see where some conflicts might occur and try to address that before they become problem. The medical model. Okay, so circumplex model, I'll just kind of classify that as out there in our realm of organizing, because you can kind of apply it to a family, individual, an organization, a society. So I think it has a lot of potential, and hopefully we see more research using it at a more macro level. Let's go ahead and get back down to the micro level and the medical model. And here we look at things like genetic factors, neurotransmitters, brain structures, and how certain conditions lead to changes in the brain, how different substances lead to changes, genetic predispositions. So here, often human behavior is explained by chemical reactions and neurotransmitters in terms of regulation of thoughts and feelings and impulse control and behaviors. And certainly, I've seen the medical model at use when I worked early on in mental health. I worked at a psychiatric center with some really wonderful psychiatrists who taught me a lot about the medical model and the psychoanalytic model and other methods of group therapy models of working in the clinical setting. And so I'm grateful I was able to have that experience, including going to jails and sitting in on competency evaluations, things like that, and all kinds of cases related to violence. And so the medical model is interesting here, but we would wonder, how does it apply to terrorism? How does it apply to terrorism? And again, I haven't really seen that much related to the medical model as it applies to, for example, specific terrorist in organizations. Where we've seen it applied, I think, is in lone wolf type terrorism, where we begin to say, well, where there's an attempt to explain a person's violent behavior, terroristic behavior, that they had some kind of mental disorder that might be based on some biological, biochemical imbalance or malfunction, or some type of brain structure abnormality or something of that nature. So we may see it more on an individual lone wolf type scenario, but when it comes to the formation of terrorist groups, it becomes more problematic. The sociobiological or evolutionary theory looks at the interaction of biological factors and the environment. And so this really starts looking at the person in the environment and how environmental aspects may change the biological makeup, and bring out different predispositions. And here there's this adaptive problem that must be addressed, kind of a genetic, instinctual one, if you will, which is for group survival. And so again, you can kind of see how the sociobiological evolutionary theory could be applied to terrorism as it relates to a group that thinks that their survival is at risk, and they must do all they can to continue their family line or their group. So here we would again look at the interaction of genetics, hormones, physiology, nutrition, substances, environmental factors, and the like. Again, some of the criticisms are based on not being able to explain certain types of violent behavior. And so we'll see that how do we apply that, basically? How do we apply that? The psychoanalytic kind of modifications from Freud's work looks at the possibility that there's early childhood traumas in terrorist groups, or an organization develops because you have multiple leaders and followers who've experienced childhood traumas. And this also gets into the whole area of id, ego, and superego, and use of defense mechanisms like repression, denial, displacement. And there's some writings on psychoanalysis and analyzing terrorists as individuals and terrorists as groups. And so there's some interesting features there. The problem with psychoanalytic perspective is it's the concepts are difficult to measure. I mean, how do you measure unconscious drives? And so I'll give you an example. I was talking to a surgeon once, and we were talking about, I was telling him I was teaching a serial murder course, and we were just discussing some stuff, and I said, by the way, the old Freudian idea that surgeons, they didn't become serial murderers because instead they could cut up people and get paid a lot of money and be highly respected, so they became surgeons. And he looked at me as if I had lost touch with reality, and I even can't tell you what he said, but he did get a laugh out of it. And he said, "You academics, my gosh, hopefully you're not teaching your students that surgeons really," and so I've used it before in looking at getting out aggressive impulses by doing pro-social aspects like sports and things of that nature. So there's something to be said about it, though. That's the thing. For years and years and years and years, I rejected the psychoanalytic perspective, most likely because I didn't understand it. And then I began to see some of the patterns that actually made some sense, and thought this is another theory that we could apply, and started reading up on it as well. So certainly some interesting features there. And then looking at the personality of the perpetrator. Based on time frame, I think I'm going to have to make several videos today rather than just this one. So I already see I'm at the 15-minute point, so let me stop there, and we'll call this Theories of Terrorism Part 1, and I'll be back in a minute.